The meeting for December 3rd, Monday, December 3rd, 6 p.m. I know. Could I ask Jim Karaboshos to lead us in a Pledge of Allegiance this evening? Thank you.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May I have roll call, please?
Councilmember Cook,
Here.
Councilmember Henley,
Here.
Vice Mayor Harrington, Councilmember Edwards.
Yes.
Mayor Agramonte.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We did not have a closed session, so there's no report on that. May I have the approval of the agenda, please?
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. May I have roll call, please?
Councilmember Cook,
Aye.
Councilmember Henley,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harrington,
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards.
Yes.
Mayor Agramonte.
Yes, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Comments from the public. At this time, I have finally remembered not to say read. At this time, this is my last night. Sorry. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't be that happy. But I am. At this time, members of the public may comment on any item not appearing on the agenda. It is recommended that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less under state law, unless otherwise permitted under the Ralph M. Brown Act. The merits of the matters presented under this item cannot be discussed or acted upon by the City Council at this time. For items appearing on the agenda, the public will be invited to make comments at the time the item comes up for council consideration. Please, upon being acknowledged by the mayor, please step to the podium and speak into the microphone and begin by stating and spelling your name. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this time?
Good evening, Council. Larry Barnett. With that introduction to the issue of 3 minutes for public comment, I am going to once again take the opportunity to talk about limiting public comment to 3 minutes. First of all, I notice that the language that the mayor just read doesn't say shall be limited to 3 minutes. It says recommend. We recommend that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. That doesn't sound like a shall to me. That means that some discretion is offered to the public in a case where they feel they can't complete their comments in just 3 minutes, that they could go over 3 minutes. Now, either there is a hard and fast rule about 3 minutes, or there isn't. I'm looking for some clarification about that, because what you've just read contradicts the way the meetings are generally run. So I would ask that either the language be changed, and I'd be interested in whether there's a law that can dictate it, although I believe that the chair of the meeting can impose a time limit on speakers. So I'm not sure that any special rule has to be passed or law has to be passed. Or maybe the decision is we don't need to have a 3-minute time limit, hard and fast. Maybe the chair of the meeting, the mayor, can decide to give someone 4 minutes. Or if an issue is important enough, 5 minutes. Essentially, the point I'm making, and this is the point I've made before, what is the point of having the public at the meetings? Are you truly and sincerely interested in public input? Is there something about the public participation that you feel is of value? If so, I think it would show respect to the public to let people say what they have to say. Now, not everyone has the experience I've had in keeping into a 3-minute role or rule, nor public speaking. For a lot of people, getting up and making comments in public is the most nerve-wracking, difficult thing they have ever done in their lives. In fact, when studies have been done, it shows that the number one fear people have are speaking in front of people, particularly strangers. And I don't always know everyone who's in the room. So I would respectfully ask that because this is a rule that can be established by the mayor and by the chair of the meeting, that you consider setting aside the timer, setting aside the lights, respecting the public, seeing how it works to simply say, gee, Mr. Barnett, thank you for your comments. Could you wrap it up, please? And let that be the way things work. I suggest it will work just fine. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and staff. Lynn Marie DeVincent in Sonoma. Thank you for this opportunity to address you all. I'm still the Community Outreach Coordinator for the Sonoma Neighborhood Association, a coalition of concerned citizens who oppose the installation of 5G cell towers in the city of Sonoma, in particular in residential zones near schools, hospitals, or senior communities. The Sonoma Neighborhood Association is now a fiscally sponsored project under the Ecological Options Network, a 501c3 environmental nonprofit. We have earned this status because we have been working nonstop since April of this year to educate the public in the city on the hazards of this unsafe technology. We are now also able to receive tax-deductible donations, which we need for our legal fund. So you can go to our Facebook page for details. And I want to thank you again for your excellent work in producing and implementing the urgent ordinance to better protect our community against the FCC's overreach into local authority of the telecom facilities. What I'd like to recommend tonight is that the council also consider a formal letter of opposition to Senate Bill S3157, the Streamlined Small Cell Deployment Act. There is still time for this to make a difference, and I have a copy of the letter from the Napa City Council that was unanimously approved on October 30th. I hope you heard good things about the 6-hour Planning Commission meeting in November that did design review for the 3 5G cell towers that are planned for so-called commercial sites. Thanks to our Sonoma Valley television coverage, thank you Bob Taylor and crew. You can view this on YouTube and fast forward through the misinformation from Verizon's salesman. One of the most important moments came quite late near the end when Commissioner Barnett asked the city's hired tech consultant whether, based on his report, Sonoma has a significant gap in coverage. This would be a reason to allow the permits. Mr. Offlerbach answered, no, there is no significant gap in coverage in Sonoma. End of review. The permits can be denied based on that fact. I will also mention that Mr. Offlerbach then nervously added, but we need to think about the future. Yes, we need to think about the future. That's why we're all here, right? Service to the community, all of you, the city's hardworking staff, and all of us volunteers are thinking about the health and well-being of our beautiful city. Let's keep it that way. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to step forward?
My name is Shelley Masters, and you wanted it spelled. So here, SHELLEYMASTERS, and I live at 336 Banchero Street. I'm electromagnetically sensitive. It's EMS. This condition is recognized by the U.S. Access Board and protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's considered a functional impairment, means that my body is fine, but the environment that I'm in has a toxin. And I'm not asking for all wireless to be banned. It's like cigarette smoking. I need to have some places where I can be where wireless isn't, like the library, like churches, grocery stores. I mean, there's a lot of places where I shop at night because I can't be in the grocery store during the day. I prepared a map of the radiation distance from the 3 proposed commercial cell towers. Each pattern or circle of the radiation extends 3,000 feet. Now that's a little bit over a half of a mile, and they all overlap my home. I mean, I really got lucky on this one. But I'd like to put this into the public record of the circles. My house is right here in the center, and they all overlap it. And these are in places where I shop and have my hair cut and visit with friends. I'm an artist and muralist, and I've created a piece of artwork for this, and I'm going to include this too. This piece is about 4 by 5 feet, and I just wanted to go in the public record as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to step forward?
My name is Mark Marthaler, 146 East Spain. I would agree that sometimes it is nerve-wracking to come up here and just speak. I don't usually plan any kind of thing to read, but I just thought I'd come up and comment or make a thank you regarding the cell tower 5G issue that has been going on for quite some time, and I do feel that the City Council and the Planning Commission and the staff and all you city people do listen to us, and very much appreciate your thoughts and consideration and commitment to our health and safety in Sonoma. So, at the end of the year, Happy New Year, and hope you have a wonderful Christmas or holiday, wherever you celebrate. Thanks for...
Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Seeing no one rise to the podium, I'm going to end the public session. And next I'm on to dedication. Does anybody have a dedication?
I'd like to dedicate this meeting to Eden Brown, Ken Brown's daughter. It's her birthday, and that's why Ken would like you to know he is not here.
Does anyone else? Well, I'd like to dedicate this evening to our former president, George H.W. Bush, number 41. And I just wanted to dedicate this meeting to him. Is there anyone else? No one. At this point, I'd like to make a presentation. I'd like Jim Karaboshos, I hope I'm saying that right, to step up front. I'd like that. So, certificate of recognition presented to Jim Karaboshos. Am I saying your name right? Say yes or no.
Karabochis. But that's close enough.
I gave it a twist. 2017 Sonoma County Outstanding Volunteer. In recognition of your outstanding service to the community and ongoing commitment to law enforcement in Sonoma Valley, presented this third day of December 2018. But before I present it to you, I have to say a few things. So, thank you. So I just wanted to know if anyone has attended any of these events. Vintage Festival, Farmers Market, 4th of July, Cinco de Mayo celebration, Film Festival, and many others. Could you raise your hands, please? Thank you. Well, guess who's been there? Jim has been to all of those. And there's so many things. I know you've been with the department as a volunteer since 2006. Is that correct? Well, I know that you and I have really a very nice friendship, and I really appreciate all the attention you give me. And if I have a question, I always go to you, Jim. But I would just like to give this to you, and I know it was given to you for last year, and I think it's wonderful. In that whole department here, you are. So I appreciate the work, and I know that they made a good decision. Would you like to say anything?
Well,
Do you have an 800 number or anything?
I'd just like to say it's really great to live in this community. I've been here 73 years, went to school here, and a lot of you here I know, and it's great to be in Sonoma. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, what are you doing here? So at this point, I think we are going to the annual report from, I'm sorry, the fire department with Chief Aker.
Thank you.
Steve Aker.
Thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to present our annual report. Should be coming up on the screen here now. So one of the things that we've endeavored to do as an organization for a few years now has been to create an annual report. And very happy and proud to say that we finally accomplished that. The annual report, council, each of you have a hard copy of the full report. And for either our audience here or watching at home, the annual report is on our website, svfra.org, under key documents. So our annual report is for calendar year 2017. I'm going to go through what I hope is a very brief PowerPoint kind of summary of the annual report. I don't want to bore anyone with all of the details, but it was written with the general public in mind. So it's I hope that it's not overly technical or too fire service specific. Hopefully it's something that everyone has a chance to be able to read and understand. So first of all, this year's and this is the first annual report, is dedicated to the Sonoma Valley community for all of its support, our ongoing support. Not only last year during a very momentous year and the events that we went through last October, but on a daily basis. All of us in the SVFRA really value and feel the community's ongoing support. And we wanted to acknowledge that for the very first time. Felt that was really important in our annual report. Second, it's dedicated to the men and women that comprise the Sonoma Valley Fire and Rescue Authority. I have never worked with a more dedicated group of individuals and a team that I'm fortunate enough to work with now. Their commitment to each other, to their profession, and to this community is nothing short of exceptional. So they're the second part of the dedication. Next, we're a very well-developed organization. We function based on a mission, vision, and values. And I'll save the reading for you at home or at your leisure. 2017, we saw the continuation of our partnership between the City of Sonoma and the Valley of the Moon Fire District. This partnership was begun back in 2002. In 2011, the current arrangement with the city contracting with the Valley of the Moon Fire District started. And then early last year, we saw that agreement be renewed for a subsequent 5 years. Additionally, on July 1st of 2017, the Glen Ellen Fire Protection District also entered into a contract for services with the Valley of the Moon Fire District. So now our partnership has three partners. Our district maintains 4 career fire stations and 2 volunteer fire stations. We staff 6 fire companies on a daily basis, 4 fire engines and 2 ambulances. And we also staff an assortment of other specialized vehicles and equipment through our wonderful efforts of 41 community volunteers that come back at all times of the day and night to help support our career folks in providing exceptional service. So with that, our area that we now protect is almost 60 square miles with a population of nearly 50,000 residents. We do this with 40 full-time employees and 40 volunteers on the firefighting side. We have 4 full-time and 3 part-time help and administration and 1 full-time person in both training and fire prevention. And for all of those, that map didn't turn out very well. Well, our coverage area is now stretches from the border between Kenwood and Glen Ellen, right about Dunbar Road, all the way up to and including the city limits of Sonoma and Temmelec. Our calls for service have been steadily increasing. We're up to now just over 5,300 calls for service last year. The majority of them are medical emergencies. And because of that, we have our system is built on the dual role service of fire and EMS. So all of the folks that we employ in the career side are trained for both EMS and fire, as are our volunteers. All of our engines and ambulances go out with a paramedic, at least one paramedic on board, so we're able to provide advanced life support to all the areas that we serve. In 2017, we responded and transported almost 3,500 patients, because we do both the initial first response as well as we have the ambulances to transport folks to the hospital. 77% of those transports were transported to our local hospital here in Sonoma. The next one is incidents by district, and this is on the EMS side. So our ambulance service, just about 50% of our calls originated here in the city of Sonoma, and then the rest distributed out between Shelville, Glen Ellen, El Verano, Agua Caliente, and a couple other smaller jurisdictions. Training, a very important part of our service. Last year we had a significant accomplishment in that we were able to reinstate the full-time training officer position for our organization. With that, we had some very significant increases in the total hours of training, almost 10,000 hours for our career staff in total, and almost 2,500 hours of volunteer training. We also put on an in-house basic academy for our 6 new apprentice firefighters, and we started up a burn trailer for training, for live fire training. You know, in the old days, we used to be able to acquire structures, and you know that somebody that wanted to get rid of an old home or an old structure on their property, and we used to do training burns, and they were great experiences. And there's nothing that takes the place of live fire when you're learning how fire behaves and how to put out fires. But in large part due to air quality concerns and some training concerns, we're not able to do the acquired structures anymore, but we did acquire, in a collaborative effort with Kenwood and Glen Ellen, as well as a grant from the county, we were able to acquire a burn trailer. And so we're able to now, it's housed up at SDC, and we're able to run all of our firefighters, career and volunteer, through that on a regular basis. So very significant accomplishment. Fire prevention. We have a full-service fire prevention bureau within our department. Last year we conducted 184 plan reviews. Our engine companies did almost 850 company inspections. And those are the inspections that just go out and hit the different business owners, business establishments within the city and district to better ensure fire safety. We also responded to nearly 200 weed abatement notifications or complaints. We inspected 30 special event reviews, and we conducted fire investigations on 24 fires. And lastly, as part of the report, we felt it was really appropriate, considering the magnitude of the Nuns Fire events last year, that we have a segment in there. So I know we've all been through this many times, but the Nuns Fire was the most destructive fire to ever hit the valley. At the time, it was the 6th most destructive fire in California's history. That's since been eclipsed a couple of times. It started as 4 separate fires, which all started within an hour of each other, and in total consumed over 54,000 acres and 1,300 structures, and took 3 lives. As we've seen this year, these types of fires have sadly continued, so in spite of everyone's best efforts. A couple other things we wanted to acknowledge with the Nuns fire was the City of Sonoma's support. The City of Sonoma very quickly that first night opened up the EOC and supported our operations and law enforcement's operations, as well as facilitated communications and information to the community. And then a second huge endeavor was providing shelters for the community that was displaced. So everyone in Glen Ellen and Boy Springs and part of the city that were evacuated, they had sheltering options here in the city. We also received unprecedented community support. The meals and supplies and signs of gratitude are things that none of us here locally will ever forget, but I want to share that we had lasting impressions on people from all over the country that came to our county and our valley and helped us out. We've received a number of letters and communications from people who just thought the community support was just unbelievable and that they had never, ever seen anything like that in all of their time. So really want to acknowledge that. And lastly, want to acknowledge our community's strength and our ability to rebuild and recover, because we are doing that. So with that, that concludes the summary of the annual report. I'd be happy to take any questions that council may have.
Does the council have any questions? You do?
I have one question. I was looking at the breakdown of the number of calls, and I noticed that the city of Sonoma has a disproportionate large share of those calls. Is there a explanation for that, or does that seem normal, or is it just Sonoma? We are vigilant with our calling.
Well, again, the majority of our calls for service are emergency medical services, and I think what without doing a more specific evaluation of those calls, there are a number of facilities within the city that garner a disproportionate or a larger share of the call volume. When we have assisted living and senior residences to the scale that we have here within the city limits, we're going to, just by the nature of that, have a lot more calls for service than in the district area, either Valley of the Moon or Glen Ellen. We don't see nearly the same amount of residents in those facilities.
Gary?
So.
And Steve, how many subscribers do you have to the ambulance service? The $49?
We were sitting somewhere around 600 at last count.
Seems like with 2,000 calls, you might be able to find a few more.
You would think.
Yeah.
We try to do our best to get advertising out. We've done advertising through water bills, both the district and city, and we know we've got some other folks out there, partners of ours that get that word out.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So, do you have a question? Yeah.
Just thinking about the Paradise Fire, if the future is that there will be regular large-scale fires, if that's what we're looking forward to, and we will presumptively be sending part of our staff there to help, what are the things that you sort of foresee in the future that we'll need to do, if anything, if that's kind of our new normal? Will there be changes if there's going to be ongoing large-scale fires that we're part of?
Absolutely. So part of what we're doing is the fire service in California in general and Sonoma County specifically is looking at many different ways in which we're improving. Part of that is the mutual aid system. Our department here has always been really supportive of the mutual aid system. We continue to be. We had sent 2 engine companies and a chief officer to Paradise to help them as soon as we possibly could that first day. So we'll continue with that. But we've part of that is maintaining our system. Making sure that we have adequate staffing here and we maintain our volunteers. Our volunteers are a critical component when we We send them out with our strike teams to gain experience and training. But when we have an emergency here locally, both in the valley and the county, we recognize the importance of all the volunteers here in the county. And unfortunately, the volunteerism has been declining, not only here in the county, but nationwide. It's tougher and tougher to meet training requirements, and here in the county, cost of living, and for people to have the discretionary time to be able to devote to training. But we've the County Fire Service and through the Board of Supervisors has allocated almost $1 million this year for recruitment and retention programs to both recruit additional volunteers and to find programs that help to retain our current stock of volunteers. So that's kind of the response side of it. We're also on the statewide level working at pre-positioning, and we've done that here in the county as well. Again, the Board of Supervisors has made a commitment of a substantial amount of money where we stand up resources when we have red flag warnings, and that was part of our response to Paradise. We had 2 strike teams stood up of additional companies here within Sonoma County, and one of those strike teams went, and one of them stayed back here because we were still under those conditions. So.
Very interesting topic, and I'm sure that if we can be helpful in that effort, that we'd like to be. So,
thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So I do have a couple of questions. One, of course, is I understand prevention and suppression, but when you move into the medical field, as you have, it sometimes makes me think maybe we should provide fire insurance here in Sonoma because we don't have fires. So that's one way, possibly a little bit of money on the side. But so you have EMS and EMTs. So EMS is your first line. Is that the lower level? Emergency medical service, is that what they are?
So our emergency medical service is broken down into 2 levels of training. We have the EMTs, which is a basic level.
Okay.
And then we have paramedics. And paramedics is often referred to as advanced life support. So they're the ones that can start IVs and hook you up to a cardiac monitor if a patient's having a cardiac event. They have a number of cardiac and other drugs that they're able to administer in the field. They're basically, at the paramedic level, they're kind of an emergency room on wheels, so to speak. There's not a lot of stuff that we can't do in the field, at least initially, to treat people.
So is there a limited amount of EMS? Does everyone have to be an EMS? I can't remember.
Everybody that's a full-time employee now we are not bringing on anyone that is not trained as a paramedic.
I see.
Now, we still have a few longer-term employees that were hired before we started that training level requirement that are EMTs, but all of our career staff are either EMTs or paramedics.
And so do you think that a portion of your budget is more geared toward medical, or are you able to balance this out in some way?
It's a balance. We do, as part of our system here, it's built on those dual roles, and we're built to respond to whichever role we're asked to provide to the community at any given time, whether it's medical, whether it's fire, whether it's rescue. A big part of our system was the city, and former Chief Al Mazza had the foresight to take over the ambulance company back in the late 80s. That has been able to provide additional staffing as well as EMS revenue, because each time we transport a patient to the hospital, it is a fee-for-service basis.
It's like the first responder. Is that what it is? First responder for medical?
No, we don't do a first responder fee, just the ambulance transport fee.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
There's nothing that anyone do. Should I take this out to the public for people to comment if they'd like? Present with the report? I think it's probably not necessary.
Sorry, typically with presentations, we don't have public comment. It's
Okay.
really just a presentation. Any questions from council?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I have one more thing that I'd like to,
Oh, okay,
like to do,
great.
if I may. So, in recognition of a lot of our partners, our collaborators with last year's fire, Our organization put together plaques with our challenge coins on both sides. We issued challenge coins to all of our members in recognition of their individual efforts. But I'd like to take a moment and read this briefly. This is from our organization and board of directors. Presented to the City of Sonoma and their staff, the Sonoma Valley Fire and Rescue Authority extends our most sincere appreciation to the Sonoma City Council, City of Sonoma staff, and the Sonoma Civic Volunteers for their commitment and support provided to our community during the fire siege of 2017. From the early hours of the fires, the City of Sonoma was actively supporting the needs of the community and of the first responders. Even though the city did not have any direct fire impact, the collateral impact was significant. The EOC was activated and supported the logistical needs of the first responders, as well as the enormous shelter needs that arose because of the fires. The council and city staff and community volunteers took on every challenge that they faced and performed incredible work under the most difficult circumstances.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Thank you so much. This is beautiful. Can we take a picture of this? Why don't we all, can we all go up there? That would be great.
One, two, three. Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. Ah, this is nice. Oh, there they go.
Here's the last one here.
Oh, did I get the badge?
Oh,
What is up this
there was a sneak. Do you want me? You want this?
No.
Because I can move it.
bad too.
Okay, I need it.
Who gets it when they were not here? So at this point, I'm going to the consent calendar. All items listed on the consented calendar are considered to be routine and would be acted upon by a single motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. At this time, council may decide to change the order of the agenda. Is there? I turn to the council for any instructions.
I would like to pull item 4.4.
I'm sorry? 4?
4.4.
Okay, 4.4. Anyone else? No. Okay, all right, we'll do that. I'm sorry, do I have to have a vote on this? No. No.
Sorry, you need to not to pull it, but then you'll need to,
Approve the others.
yes, and take
Okay.
public comment on the consent calendar before
All
council
righty,
takes
so could
action.
I have a vote, approval on the other items here if we pulled one?
You need to open to public comment
Okay,
before you
okay.
do that.
That's what I was waiting for here. Is there anyone here who would like to make a public comment on 4.4 that's been pulled or any others?
Yeah, at this point, we would not be taking comment on 4.4. We will deal with that separately, but if any member of the public has comments on
Anything else? Okay, on any of the
4.1, 2,
other
or
items
3.
except for 4.4? Seeing no one, I'll close the public comment.
Oh, I make a motion to approve items 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3 of the consent calendar.
Second?
Could I have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Mayor Agramonte?
Aye, and now we will go to 4.4.
So 4.4, we'll have the city clerk read it, and then we'll have Kathy Peace, our contract planner, provide just a brief overview.
This is approve a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sonoma denying an appeal approving findings and adoption of a mitigated negative declaration for the Sonoma Gateway Mixed-Use Development Project located at 870 Broadway, assessor parcel numbers 018412025 and 018412030, and a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sonoma denying an appeal and approving the use permit, tentative map, and related entitlements for the Sonoma Gateway Project as revised dated September 24th, 2018, located at 870 Broadway, APN 018122025 and 018412030.
So at the last meeting, I indicated on this topic, that I wanted to receive formal advice from the FPPC regarding my ability to participate in these proceedings. Since I had moved my office, I wrote the letter to the FPPC, and I received a letter back from them saying that they had received my letter and that they would provide me with formal advice. I do not have that letter of advice yet at this point, and so I can't proceed with the substantive matter. If my colleagues would vote to continue the matter, then I could vote in the future, and otherwise I will have to recuse myself.
Well, I'm sorry my computer has died. Just one moment, please. Does that happen to you? It's still not working. So let's see. I'm sorry, could I turn to the city manager for this?
So you've basically had a request by Vice Mayor Harrington for a request for a continuance. So there would need to be a motion to continue the matter, second, and then a vote to see if that is where the council wants to go, and then that would be the first action. And then if it is continued, then we would be stopping there, and I'll look to the city attorney if I'm missing anything. If it is, we would need to take public comment on the continuance. So we would do a first, I'm looking at city attorney, look first and second, or should we take public comment first on the action before there's a motion?
Vice Mayor Harrington, it is your desire to continue, you'd be making such a motion. Is that your plan?
Well, I put the matter out there and to ask my colleagues if they would support it. I haven't made a motion, but that's
Okay.
the
So-
question first is discussion.
Sure. So I think at this point, you'd open up, Madam Mayor, to the public to comment on the question of continuance. And after the public makes its comments, you'd bring it back for potential action by the council on the
Okay.
continuance issue only.
All right. So I can take it out to the public? So I'd like to take this out to the public for any comments regarding this issue.
Thank you very much. I'm Jennifer Hernandez, representing the applicant. I must say it's a pleasure to be at such a beautiful place again. The holiday decorations and everything else are just tremendous. I wanted to just briefly comment that we have already seriously sort of delayed this, and I would respectfully request that you bring this to a vote today. This is a project that frankly has met all your rules, and we don't believe another delay is warranted. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments?
I'm Charlotte Ruffner, Ruffner. I live at 649 First Street West, and I'm extremely frustrated. I'm sure you've all seen my editorial in the Sonoma Index Tribune. I started a petition. I am so tired of waiting for this council to do something with the Gateway project. It is such an eyesore. I've only lived here for 3 years, and I am sick of it. And I'm the president of newcomers. I have people in my club, 300 members. They've looked at it for years, and they're tired of looking at it. I started a petition. I don't have that many signatures because of the rain and the smoke and so on, but I have over 70 signatures from residents who are tired of looking at that. And I'm basically begging you to approve this today. It's already been approved. And with respect to the conflict of interest, I'm an attorney, I'm retired, but you do have a conflict of interest. I don't know why you have to take it to the FPPC. Living or having an office next door to the property is clearly a conflict. You will suffer there while construction's going on, and it will affect your the covenant of quiet enjoyment. And there's no way because during the construction. So you should recuse yourself. I don't know why, as an attorney, a fellow attorney, you have to wait for instructions from the FPPC. All you have to do is read the regs, and it's right there. You have a conflict. You should recuse yourself and allow the remainder of this council to proceed today. One more comment, if I have the time. Let's see. I just want to say, what got me going here was a quote in the newspaper by Mayor Agramonte, who said, when the council's attacked, we have to circle the wagons. And that's exactly how I feel. This project's been attacked. Scott Hunter's been attacked. And the community is now circling its wagons. And it's time to get off the dime and to vote on this today and get it done with so that he can proceed. It's all about compromises, and he's made all of the compromises, Scott Hunter. And this council hasn't made, or the voters, the people who voted against it have not made any compromises. Remember, the Eiffel Tower was not liked by some people. The Transamerica building was not liked by some people. Pete's Coffee in Sonoma was not liked by some people. Look at it today. It's packed. So yes, you can't have your way all the time. This is it. Please vote for it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ruffner.
Good evening, Council. My name is Louis Braun. I reside at 871 First Street West in Sonoma. As I spoke last time, I think Amy Harrington, our Vice Mayor, is trying to follow process. She's trying to turn it over to the correct authorities to give the yay or the nay. I think she represents many people in Sonoma. I think her voice should be heard. So I'm just really rooting, neither at this moment about the project. I'm talking about process, and that the process, as we get more and more into these kinds of issues, has to be followed, or we just tangle ourselves up in a worse matter. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who would like to rise and step forward to the podium? Seeing no one, I'll close the public comment section. So if, pardon?
Can I ask something?
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, can I ask the city attorney to respond to the statement that there is a clear legal conflict because of the construction noise and the covenant of quiet enjoyment?
It first of all depends on the nature of your relationship with the master tenant and your office sharing partner. And I don't know what that relationship is. And you've conveyed that information, I'm sure, to the FPPC. So that's number one. So that's an unknown to me. So to answer your question is problematic. Whether it affects your quiet enjoyment, I'm not in the office. You would know that for sure better than I. Whether it affects your parking, your views, all those sorts of things, I'm assuming you've conveyed that information to the FPPC. It's always best to get an opinion from the FPPC, and that's primarily for the benefit of the council member whose interests may in fact constitute a conflict. That is the best place to go, because an opinion from the city attorney offers no protection from later administrative proceedings, criminal and otherwise, against an individual official. You need to have that FPPC opinion to protect yourself from that kind of enforcement activity.
Thank you.
So is anything else from, I feel short. Shit, how did I get the bad chair? Is there anyone else who would like to, did you have something you'd like to share?
I would be in support of a continuance, and I would like to make a motion to continue this matter until Vice Mayor Harrington's received a response from the FPPC.
Second.
Is that where we're proceeding here? I think there were, okay. All right.
Councilmember Cook?
No.
Councilmember Henley?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards?
No.
Mayor Agramonte?
No.
Thank you. Motion carries 3-2.
Well, it doesn't carry.
Oh, it fails. I'm sorry.
Bye.
So now we're headed on to resolutions. Is that what we're looking at? Oh, sorry. Mr. Cook?
I'd like to make a motion.
Before we do that, sorry. You need to open this item back to the public for discussion about the merits of the resolutions.
And Mayor Garmonte, if you like, council likes, staff is here if there's any kind of overview presentation. I know you've looked at this a lot, so I'll leave that. I'm looking for, if you would like a brief presentation, I'm looking for heads.
Is
If
that
you want to just
the-
move to public comment, you can do that.
No? Mary? No, we're ready to move forward? Are you, Rachel, you're okay with moving forward?
Yep.
Okay, we can just move forward.
Okay, so Mayor, you can open it to public comment.
Okay, I would like to open 4.4 to public comment. Thank you, City Manager.
Good evening, Council. Mayor Larry Barnett, 637 5th Street East. I'm going to read my remarks tonight. Setting aside the pluses or minuses of this project, I'm distressed about the procedural irregularities and sloppiness in the process of this application. These issues are most striking in consideration of the last appeal hearing, which concluded with a motion by Mr. Edwards that was incomplete and improper in its form, and the acting city attorney, rather than taking the time to correct the motion by suggesting proper amendments, allowed the vote to proceed. The motion, as made and adopted, did not include any specifics as to what changes in the project were being approved, and matters of importance were not fully discussed or resolved. Among these are the affordable units, and namely, should they be clustered or dispersed, and should they be rentals or for sale. Accordingly, these matters have been decided by city staff and/or others, and these decisions incorporated in the resolutions before you tonight. The citizens do not know how these decisions were made, who made them, and under what conditions. They deserve full public discussion, and the public deserves to know where each of you stand. It is wholly irregular and improper for staff or the city attorney to make these decisions for you. The resolutions rely on arguments that this project is exempt from CEQA and an EIR due to its being an infill project within an urban area under infill streamlining provisions. However, as others have noted, Sonoma does not meet the technical definition of an urban area under CEQA, which definition requires a population of 100,000 people. Accordingly, it is an improper argument not supported by facts and must be discarded. Moreover, setting the improper precedent of classifying the city of Sonoma as an urban area opens the door to all future infill projects being declared exempt from CEQA. This poses a serious danger to the environment, character, and quality of the city of Sonoma, and I urge the council and staff to comply with the proper definitions in CEQA law. The alternative is conflict and lawsuits. Ignoring the implications of the court and the Niles decision increases the likelihood of a court challenge to this project. Prudence would dictate requiring an EIR due to conflicting expert opinion. Finally, the Housing Accountability Act pertaining to the affordable units requires that low and very low units be included in order for the provisions of that act to apply. As described, these units do not meet the requirements. Ignoring this provision presents another way in which future projects can distort and manipulate the intent of the law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is
And
there
I have
anyone else?
I have a copy and supporting documents in law that I'd like to distribute.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone who would like to step up, step up to the?
Victor Conforti, 755 Broadway. The Housing Accountability Act that has been used as the basis for the letter that you received from the project's attorney has some potential problems with it in terms of the affordability of the units. In the Housing Act, it defines that there be at least 20% of the total units be a low income category. And in their definition, that is 60% of the median income, which is far different than the project proposal. The current proposal has a moderate income projects, all of the 8 units, in a couple different, slightly different categories. One, 100% of the median income, and the other 110%. When in the AHA, or the HAA requires a 60% of the median income. So by invoking the act, this Housing Act, they're needing to provide affordable housing at a much lower level than is being proposed. And that should be researched. I mean, it should be a part of the resolution to make it clear if what the effect of this is, and also so that the you know what it is you're approving. But first, that should be resolved, because there's really no reason to move forward when the actual proposal doesn't meet the HAA. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conforti. Is there anyone else who would like to rise?
My name is Lou Braun, and I reside at 871 First Street West in Sonoma. I would like to raise 3 important points to the council this evening. First, I want you to know that a group of concerned Sonoma citizens strongly believes that the City Council needs to order an EIR for the project. We do not wish to pursue legal remedies and urge the Council not to pass the resolution and to order the EIR. Secondly, we believe a strong case can be made that an EIR should be ordered for the project. As was shown in the case of Niles versus Fremont, when the citizens of a community, especially ones who are considered experts, present a fair argument and evidence of significant impact in opposition to the arguments of the developer, then an EIR is the only correct remedy to resolve the outcome. Finally, we believe the second paragraph of the resolution presented tonight reflects a significant inaccuracy, not only for this project, but as a precedent for future projects. That is, it characterizes Sonoma as an urban area, as Larry pointed out. Our understanding of CEQA's definition of an urban area is where the population of the incorporated city, and the population of the surrounding unincorporated areas is over 100,000 people. Obviously, at this point in time, the Sonoma Valley has far less than 100,000 people. We would respectfully request that the council send this resolution back to staff to substantiate why Sonoma qualifies as an urban area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Braun. Is there anyone else who would like to step forward?
Hello again. Scott Hunter, 625 First Street West. In spite of the last couple of speakers, I'm very happy to be here tonight. I suspect that we're on the verge of finishing this phase of the approval process. And I just wanted to remind everyone that this is a project that is 100% compliant with code. It's a great project, and we're looking forward to moving forward with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter.
Thanks very much. Jennifer Hernandez, attorney for the project. I did want to briefly respond to each of the points that was raised. First off, this project has come before this board or this council already and was approved. The form of project that was approved is clear and stable and has been stable since September 24th. There's really no possible confusion about what the project is. It's reflected in the reso. Second, the reso has to, as a matter of law, include a whole set of findings that have been deemed necessary. It's kind of like when you pay your taxes, it's not enough to send in the check. You got to fill out the forms. So the reso includes the required form. In this case, it's findings for the CEQA decision that's embodied in the reso as directed by council, and it's findings for the project approval decision. Next, I want to clarify that this project did not skip CEQA, nor was it approved based on an exemption. The fact is, it qualified, but this council and the city staff and the planning commission put this project through a negative declaration process, which is frankly much more extensive and requires a lot of analysis and really requires the project to come in and demonstrate the absence of any environmental impact. A categorically exempt project may or may not ever occur here, but this is not that project. This project was approved based on a negative declaration. I can tell you more about CEQA, an urbanized area, which is not urban area, but that's the nerd space that frankly you don't have to go to. Finally, an EIR is required for a project when there is substantial evidence in the record that the project is going to cause a significant adverse environmental impact. That is just not the case here. And this is not the applicant or its consultants talking. This staff and your consultant team scrubbed this project 7 ways from Sunday, responded to every question, modified the project, is conditioned with not just project approval conditions, but mitigation measures to assure that there are no adverse impacts. I also want to just note, just briefly, the Housing Accountability Act does not mandate the level of affordability that's been presented here today, but the Housing Accountability Act is a remedy for cities who don't approve projects that meet their standards. Here, we're very much hoping you do approve a project, this project, because it meets what you've said you wanted for this site. And we really appreciate and very much hope that you'll be able to make a decision favorably today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fernandez. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Patty DeFern, 465 East MacArthur Street in Sonoma. I am really aware of how the vote went on this originally, and I'm really disappointed that one of the people that had strong objections is not being considered in this vote. I think the only thing that's left for this community is to adhere to CEQA. And I find that what was completely misrepresented in this project, and Madeline, as you would know, the one driveway that's going to go into East MacArthur Street. And then right across the street is the hotel, which has its driveway right there. I think that one thing alone should have required the AIR. And I'm really disappointed that Councilman Harrington is not there to make an evaluation on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who would like to step to the podium? No one? I see no one. Close the public comment section. So I'll ask our city manager, where do we go?
So this is time for any council discussion, and then after council discussion and any questions, et cetera, then we would go to looking for a motion.
Councilmember Hundley.
Thank you. I won't repeat all of the CEQA-related deficiencies that we've talked about at the last meeting, and I don't think that this project is CEQA compliant, and I think that there was substantial evidence on the record of impacts that have not been mitigated. But I am troubled by the resolution and the findings that have been presented today, because they are not consistent with the action that the council took at the last meeting. And in fact, the way that it's described in here, it says, following the conclusion of the public hearing, the city council directed staff to prepare resolutions making findings and denying the appeal, adopting the mitigated negative declaration, and approving a use permit tentative map and related entitlements. But that isn't precisely what the motion was. The motion actually didn't give direction to do anything, and it also was specifically to uphold the decision of the Planning Commission, which is not the project that is being approved tonight. So the inconsistencies between the action taken by the council officially and the document being presented today makes me wonder where this document came from, because this is not what the council acted on. And further, there were two important issues that were not resolved at the last meeting that were left to council discretion, and they didn't make a decision on it. One was, is it going to be for rent or for sale for the affordable units? This was an open question. There was no consensus on it, and it was not a part of the action that was taken. And then the second was, if the units are not going to be dispersed as they were required to be, then the council has to say that they're not going to be. So these are two things that were not decided. The fact that there's a document here making this decision, I have an issue with something that was drafted that was not directed by council in an open public meeting. So I can't support this tonight.
Gary?
So going back, I made the motion. The motion was based on the discussion that we had at the time, where I articulated why the units should all be together and the opportunity to build those, and they were detailed by staff to build those 500 square foot units, and we got into a whole discussion about is 500 square feet enough, and so on and so forth. But as far as being dispersed, I also brought up in my comments and that this is a very small development. So the units are they're right there. So they're kind of neighbors of everybody in the project. And I remember the comments that I made in that discussion, but the motion was that we had, which I read, we had a full plate of opportunity to bring the height down, et cetera, additional parking spaces, and so on. And I still stand by it. I think we desperately need housing. 17,000 units went up in smoke in an hour and a half away from, or 2 hours away from us. And if we don't start building something soon, we're in big trouble. And I'm going to completely support this tonight. I love the idea that the units, we even got down to talking about the affordable units are going to get the sunset. I know it's got to be in the tape. I never watched these tapes, but that's something that I feel is very important. And I think we're going to have a great project here. And if we don't start building something soon, there won't be a Sonoma down the road. So, thank you.
David, did you have anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'd like to go ahead and make a motion to approve 4.4 on the consent calendar.
So, Councilmember Cook, if you could go to the resolutions themselves and make a motion to approve the first resolution, which is the resolution of the City Council of the City of Sonoma denying an appeal, approving findings, and adopting a mitigated negative declaration for the Sonoma Gateway Mixed-Use Development Project located at, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but if you could move that resolution specifically, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the resolution of the City Council of the City of Sonoma denying an appeal, approving findings and adopting a mitigated negative declaration for the Sonoma Gateway Mixed Use Development Project as amended September 24th, 2018. Applicant submittal located 870 Broadway, assessor parcel numbers 018-412-025 and 018-412-030.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
No.
Vice Mayor Harrington is absent. Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Mayor Agramonte?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries, 3-1-1.
And now you have the second resolution before you actually approving the project itself, which is a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sonoma denying an appeal and approving a use permit, tentative map, and related entitlements for the Sonoma Gateway Project as revised September 24th, 2018, located at 870 Broadway, and the APN numbers.
Can I so move on that resolution stated?
Second.
Roll call. Please.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
No.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Mayor Agramonte?
Yes.
Motion carries 3-1-1. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Where are we? Oh, yeah. We're going to take a break. Yes, and so I'm bringing this council back to 6.1 and our city clerk.
Discussion, consideration, and possible action regarding extension of short-term measures addressing housing loss and displacement resulting from the October fires and recent North Bay fires, including 1, extension of an urgency ordinance establishing short-term allowances for housing, 2, update on rent gouging restrictions in local authority, and 3, a resolution continuing a fee waiver program for accessory dwelling units.
Mayor Agramonte, members of the council, members of the community, and we'll just give a brief update. So if council recalls, we had a number of subcommittees after the fire, and at that point, it was then Councilmember Harrington and then Mayor Hundley were on a subcommittee working on housing emergency measures. And they worked with David Goodison, our planning director, and came up with 3 different things that the council implemented last year and that will sunset on December 31st if the council doesn't extend. One was an urgency ordinance allowing housing opportunities, and this was really allowing both like recreational vehicles to be in someone's driveway, not on the street, rental of guest houses, pool houses, and other accessory structures, and allowing long-term rentals of vacation rentals without having folks losing their ability to keep that as a vacation rental. So that was, and those things were used shortly after the fire, and in looking and talking to the folks currently, there hasn't been any current use. But again, looking at the situation in Paradise, staff is hearing anecdotally of folks from Paradise looking for places in Sonoma. And so as a staff recommendation in front of you to extend that housing urgency ordinance until December 31, 2019. The next item was rent gouging. And this was, as the council is full aware, there is a penal code section that's basically controls price increases for rental housing when there is a declaration of an emergency. So our declaration of emergency was completed, I think, in March or April of 2018. But meanwhile, the governor has an executive order that he put in place shortly after the fires, and it's been, I think, extended 2 times. And just last week was extended again to May 2019. I don't know the exact date in May.
And that was by the governor?
By the governor. So based on this, our city attorney has had conversations with the district attorney and can answer more specific questions and can also talk through some of the legalities of this. But at this point, based on the extended executive order, the rent gouging, and ability to basically look for situations where that does exist, where there's more than a 10% increase in rent, that the district attorney will be following up based on the extension of the urgency order. I think it's important to say if and when the urgency or the executive order, from the governor would go away, the city council, and Jeff can speak to this, would not have the ability to continue it because it is in place when there is a local emergency declaration. And so the governor would need to do that, and we're not sure if we could continue after. We don't believe we could. But good news to have it extended for a while longer for us all. And then the last item was a creation of a program to try to encourage accessory dwelling units. And this was a fee waiver program for both city and other impact fees from other agencies for a total of $5,000. We have not had anyone request this yet. Staff has put together kind of good administrative reimbursement forms, all of that, and we are communicating with folks that have submitted, but we recommend you extend through June 30. There are a number that are under construction. And again, funding was already set aside from the city's reserves. So happy to answer any questions. And again, Councilmember Hundley or Vice Mayor Harrington may have additional comments. Staff did consult with both of them, though some pieces of this were evolving in the last couple of weeks.
So are there any questions from the city council? No. With respect to the ADUs, you said there are some that are under construction. So could you give us just an example of what that might mean? You know, what does the project look like? Just one or whatever.
So I have a neighbor building one right now. I just toured it. It's I couldn't tell you square footage. It's maybe 800 square feet. It's 2-bedroom, one kind of modest sized bedroom and one bedroom that could, it's much smaller, but could be both a office or a second bedroom. And then it's kind of one space with a kitchen, dining room, living room, and all kind of one open area. Cozy, beautiful, and sits in the back of her lot. So we have another neighbor that's building a new home, and they are putting one in as well. So we do know of accessory dwelling units that are being built in town, and so this program basically it's a fee reimbursement program up to $5,000, and those $30,000 set aside. So if everyone would put in for the full 5,000, that means you would be helping to sponsor and underwrite 6 of these units in town. I think it was set as a way to try to create some incentives and encourage them moving forward.
Thank you. Is there a way to know, I mean, how much would this structure, how much do you think this costs just to build it?
They are
Depends
full,
upon-
it really depends. Some of them are standalone, some of them are additions to a home, some are converting a garage. There is a great website called, that San Mateo County has collaborated on, called Homes for All. I think it's Homes for All San Mateo County. If you Google, it'll come up. They have a lovely toolbox, and one of the toolbox items I have is on ADUs, and they basically have put together plans and costs and model information on like 6 different ADUs that have been built on the peninsula. So it's a great kind of site to go learn, and I think we can see what comes out of this and how we can continue to help encourage some of these kind of unique infill opportunities.
Oh, I'm sorry, Gary, yes.
So to answer part of the question, it's not the exact price, but I've toured a couple of these that are under construction, one near the hospital and another one in the Springs. And they were somewhere around between 110 and 135,000. And the units are gorgeous that I've seen.
Thank you. So at this point, I'd like to take it out to the public for any comments. I don't see anyone stepping up to the podium, so I will close the public comments.
Before the recent fires in Paradise, we were discussing these and thinking about which ones we wanted to keep, and then, of course, those fires happened, and then even before we started hearing of people coming to Sonoma and looking for somewhere to live, even listing off 4 counties, just trying to find something somewhere remotely in the Northern California area. So I will be supporting these tonight, and some of these, like temporary housing, I know that maybe we had a few people take advantage of them at the end of last year, but I think that it's better to have the opportunity available. And then as for the ADU fee waivers, if anybody wants to get free money to build a ADU, you can retrofit a bedroom in your house or build something in your backyard, and it's definitely something that I want to work on more. And I think that there's some other strategies that we can use to make it easier for people to go through the process to build them, in addition to trying to subsidize some of the money. But for now, I think that these are the least that we could do to try to help a little bit with what's happening.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
Just briefly, I think some of these kind of emergency measures are things that we want to work into being permanent measure here, like encouraging the ADUs and the figuring out ways that other places have done to make them less expensive, like pre-approved plans, so that if people use the plans that are pre-approved, they know that they can just go straight forward and build them, and then have builders who know how to build that exact ADU. I think there's things like that we can do, and I hope we continue to, look into things like that. So.
Thank you. So my question, I guess, would be, and it doesn't have to be answered now, with Habitat for Humanity, I wonder if they can help with these ADUs. I don't know if the 2 lines cross over. I don't know if they can do that on public property. I mean, obviously, it's in another method that they use, but I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know in terms of enough about their program. We're going to be meeting with Habitat for Humanity, and we'll learn more, but I know they do a range of size of units. I'm not sure if they've been involved in any ADUs.
I think I also shared with you that I think in San Mateo County, they actually built a apartment complex. And I'll have to find out what that is. It's not just a house, there are units, but I'll find out about that. So at this point, are there any questions, comments? So what is the pleasure of this council?
Does this motion have to have the name of the ordinances? Is it introducing the ordinance, or is it just the, can I say the staff recommendations?
I would recommend that you would introduce, actually, you're not introducing the ordinance, you're adopting it. So you'd make a motion to adopt the ordinance, and then if you'd read the title only, that would be sufficient.
I would like to make a motion to adopt an extension of an urgency ordinance of the City Council of the City of Sonoma establishing temporary housing measures to address displacement resulting from the Sonoma Complex fire.
I'll second that.
May I have roll call, please?
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Mayor Agramonte? Aye. Thank you. The motion carries unanimously.
So we are now moving on to 6.2.
No, I'm sorry, there still is a resolution.
Oh, all right, sorry.
So the second one, shall I read it, or anyone have it up there?
Okay.
So this would be a resolution of the City Council of the City of Sonoma extending a program of fee waivers and reimbursement for accessory dwelling units and for temporary use permits associated with housing for displaced residents.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Henley?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Edwards?
I wanted to
You
do
okay,
it
Madeline?
for you.
Yes.
I wanted to take care of Amy.
Mayor Agramonte?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
All right. And that's it, right? Yeah. Okay. There's nothing else from 6.1. Okay, 6.2.
Discussion, consideration, and possible direction on regulations on wine tasting facilities in the city, including restrictions for the Plaza Retail Overlay District.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think Councilmember Edwards will be recusing
I'm
himself.
going to go have a glass of wine.
Okay.
Bye, Gary. This is Councilmember Edwards' last meeting, so that was it. Official meeting. Bye, Gary.
I don't even know what to say. Bye.
Bye, Gary.
Okay. City Clerk. 6.2.
Would you like me to read it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Discussion, consideration, and possible direction on regulations on wine tasting facilities in the city, including restrictions for the Plaza Retail Overlay District.
Good evening, Mayor Agramonte, members of the council, and members of the community. So as council is aware, back in early 2017, the council held a retreat and looked at some of the recent years and the increase of tasting rooms down in the plaza. And there were concerns about kind of the mix of retail, restaurants, and tasting rooms, also concerns about kind of increasing rent and some loss of some retail, and also then just this overall kind of thought of wanting to kind of preserve community character. So with that, the council put in place a moratorium that's been in place since December 2017, and it's now been extended to May 1st, 2019. And the purpose of our conversation tonight is to get policy direction. And so specifically what we will be doing is, if council, I'm assuming you want to move forward, we will be drafting some kind of an ordinance. And that ordinance then would need to be reviewed by both Planning Commission and yourself before coming back. And again, after council takes first and second reading, there still is a 30-day timeline before the May 1 deadline of your urgency ordinance. So we're looking for feedback from you. And if necessary, we can take, this is your first conversation of really what do you want a future ordinance to look like, or regulations. So what we'd like to do is kind of get feedback from you, get overall direction, If we need to come back and talk more about the tools or what are different technical ways of doing that and do some research, we can do that. But with that being said, let me give you just a little overview, and I'll also be sharing some of this presentation with David Storr, our new planning director. So just a few construct pieces. This is the downtown planning district plan area, which is broader than what we call the Plaza Retail Overlay District, which sits within the downtown planning district area. And the current urgency ordinance basically, and that current moratorium does not allow any more tasting rooms within the Plaza Retail Overlay District. That is the current urgency ordinance. The little blue dots that you see, there are 5 of them. Those are the tasting rooms with type 2 licenses that are outside of the Plaza Retail Overlay District at this time. And this is a chart that we have updated just in the last month to show a variety of information. And again, you can see the shaded areas of the Plaza Retail Overlay District. I think one thing that's interesting when we look at these types of licenses, there are different types of ABC licenses. So the focus of the council has been on the type 2, those red triangles, which are wine tasting rooms and sales rooms. There's also a green, call that a hexagon, I guess, which is a tasting room, but also has kind of combo retail, and that's the Highway 12. It's kind of it's a mix, more that way. But there are also, and then there's a pink, I'm not sure the pink one's on this one, it's not. Then there is the purple triangle, which is a 41 license, which is a beer and wine eating place, and that's the Cheese Factory has that license. And then there are wine bar tap rooms, which is a license 42, and there are 3 of those down in the Plaza Retail Overlay, and well, 2 in and 1 outside. And again, this is back in 2012. The council had a conversation about whether to regulate wine tasting rooms, and there was also, I think, a conversation about the wine bar tap rooms, and the council did put restrictions and some regulations on the wine bar tap rooms and required the conditional use permit for those. And so I think just when we are, even staff, when we went through and updated the inventory, literally what you think might be a tasting room might actually be a beer and wine eating place license. And so the different types of ABC licenses can be confusing. And again, what we have been talking about and what your current urgency ordinance focuses on the type 2 wine tasting ABC license. So if you recall, when we did the moratorium last year, we reviewed, because there were 5 different proposed tasting rooms that were in process. And we reviewed those with legal because we wanted some clarity of whether they would, whether they were, I'm going to use the word vested. And it was determined that whether they were whether they had submitted for a building permit, whether they were in process for that building permit, or they submitted for a business license, there was an opinion from legal that those folks need to be considered as part of the grandfathered tasting rooms. And we can talk more about this as well. But again, we really have those tasting rooms that are already constructed and operating with those type 2 licenses are currently permitted uses, and David can talk more about this, and are exempted from the moratorium, which means they can change. Someone else can come in and take over that current use. These 5 here, there were a few things. One, the top one, the Todd Family Post. This came in initially as a type 2 wine tasting facility, and they actually changed and became a restaurant, which is a different type of license, and they went through a conditional use permit process through the Planning Commission. Bedrock and Abbott's Passage and Shug were 3, and those were new tasting rooms that were exempted from the moratorium. And then Gene Edwards Cellars was really a replacement for a prior Falker winery. But those were 5 that were kind of in a little bit of a different bucket, but were exempted from the moratorium. So these are the current list of the type 2 wine tasting facilities within the Plaza Retail Overlay. And you can see, again, we put back in 2012 what the count was. There were about 13 within the overlay district, and there were 4 that were outside. Today, based on our best count, and I want to thank the Chamber of Commerce, Mark Bodenhammer and his crew, who helped go out and kind of update the inventory in the last 6 weeks. While there were some changes, there was 1 that closed, there were 3 that changed to different providers. There were currently 22 that were established. And then there was, that looked to be 4 that were initially opened as O2 for a total of 26. And then there were 5 that sit outside the Plaza Retail Overlay District. With that, I'm going to turn it to David Storr to go through the rest of the presentation.
So if I can, I'd just like to speak to the concept of zoning very quickly. Talk about the types of uses that you can do within your zoning districts, whether it's residential, commercial. I'll use residential as an example. So if you have a vacant piece of land in a residential zoning district, if you will, a non-permitted use, such as an industrial building, let's say, is not allowed in that zone. If on that vacant piece of land in the residential zone you want to put a house, it's principally permitted. And you'll see that very typically in your zoning code with a P or something like that, or a check mark. And that's typically how zoning codes are constructed. If you want to put a church, for example, on that vacant piece of land in a residential zone, it may be allowed, maybe a good idea, bad idea, but it usually have something like a U or a CUP, a conditional use permit, or a use permit. They're pretty much the same thing. And in the case of our wine tasting facilities, principally permitted uses, they're allowed. And so we have that in our commercial zone. And if you look at the mixed use zone in our zoning code, a use permit or a conditional use permit is allowed. And you'll see the word conditional sometimes used in our zoning code, sometimes not. It's the same thing. So it does require discretion, and it's not really a ministerial permit as you would get with a principally permitted use. And I've just turned everything off. And that concludes my presentation tonight. I have no idea what I did. So there we go. Yes, I designated driver here. Previous one, if you don't mind. So again, we're talking about commercial zones. You have 2 commercial zones. We have 2 commercial zones, a C and a CG. As I just mentioned earlier, a use permit is required for in the mixed use zone for a wine tasting facility. Next. What I've done here is I've provided some of the parameters. I won't go through each one of them, but this is the kind of discretion that is provided in our municipal code, in our zoning title. Not only do you have to get ABC licenses to operate a facility, but also you need a health permit. You also need to have these particular 4 items addressed. These are what you've recently provided into your municipal code within the last year or 2, I believe. Next. There was some survey work done. You can see that the need for a conditional use permit or a use permit, I don't know what each one of these jurisdictions calls it, but the point is there is a level of discretion that goes to the Planning Commission, with the exception of Windsor. Next. There was extensive community outreach. I won't go into all of the different kind of things, but we did have Planning Commission hearings and also opportunities throughout the community for the public to provide input. And again, meetings with outreach with the business community and the businesses in the plaza. Next. In this summer, the Planning Commission did provide some direction. There was no motion made, however. There were, I believe, 6 commissioners present. I believe 1 was absent. So individual comments were provided. They've been provided in your packet. And basically the synopsis is that the commissioners did support a numeric limit and a requirement for a use permit, some form of discretion of the Planning Commission. Next. Some of the items I've listed, there's basically 10 items that have been that were discussed by the Planning Commission, whether it was inside the Plaza Retail Overlay District or outside, whether it required a special license in tandem with or without a use permit. There were concerns about establishing non-conforming uses for those uses that have been principally permitted within the PROD, and also outside of the PROD. General consensus was that there needs to be some form of economic development response, perhaps even as part of a general plan update. And then also the commission was talking about a use permit throughout the whole city, not just within the PROD, where you can deal with unique concerns similar to the ones that I just outlined for those in the mixed use district. Next. Again, you can read here that economic diversity was an important issue with respect to also comments received by the Planning Commission with respect to being overly restrictive with a cap lower than the number that's currently out there, regulations relating to businesses that face the plaza on all four sides, and an issue was raised with respect to grape sourcing. Next. So some of the options you can see outlined there. There's 6 of them. I won't spell them all out. We've kind of talked about some of them along the way. Next. And as you see this next slide from left to right, you can see the level of governmental regulation or oversight increase as you go from left to right with respect to those 6 categories that I've just outlined. Going all the way from no control regulation, if you will, from the government with respect to numerical limits, restrictions in the Plaza Retail Overlay District with respect to geographic scope, whether or not to issue a use permit or some form of a permit requirement, and also with respect to limiting on the low end of no size limit and to no sourcing requirement. The far right-hand side is what you're seeing done in other jurisdictions that I mentioned previously when we did our survey of other communities. Next. You can see here that we provided you some kind of options with respect to numerical limit. We currently have outlined that there's 26 within the city. Kathy showed the slide, and we can go back to that should you wish to. From a regulatory standpoint, from a planning perspective, it's very difficult to keep a track on licenses, use permits, keeping those numbers, whether you put a threshold on it. The situation that we have here in the city right now is that we do have about 26 that have actually been principally permitted. So we have no really, other than getting a business license and trying to figure that out, but we've had no ability to regulate like we have the ability to do in the mixed use zone. So if the council is of the opinion to want to go towards those same kind of regulations that we have in the mixed use zone, then we'd need a use permit to do that and possibly expand or contract based on the 5 areas that we talked about, 6 areas that we talked about previously on things that you can choose to regulate. Next. This then basically outlines again the geographic scope of a permit. Again, whether or not there's a special use permit, if you will, something that's been done in other jurisdictions, creating instead of a conditional use permit or a use permit, there's another animal out there called a special use permit, and that can be just sized and customized for wine tasting facilities should the council provide that direction. That particular process would be issued by the planning director, myself, with very limited oversight with respect to things that can or cannot be done, almost in tune with the principally permitted things, but it would require a public meeting and a public hearing as well. Next. Oh, and by the way, my actions can be appealable to the Planning Commission and City Council. With respect to location, again, the question of whether or not there's an issue concerning facilities facing the plaza, whether you put a limit on each block face, if you will, and then also possibly whether one can be adjacent to another. An existing principally permitted, as we have in the case of our current facilities, or whether you just want them on the corners, perhaps. Those are some kind of the concerns that you can restrict or place with location restrictions.
Maybe just one point here. In terms of the current plaza, immediately facing the plaza and those kind of adjacent corners, there are currently 5 wine tasting facilities that have a Type 2 license. So that's kind of your current inventory of those that are currently directly facing the plaza, which could be something that you want to look at in your regulations. We can talk more about that.
With respect to our recommendations, there are 5 recommendations. The first one being a numerical limit for the PROD, the Plaza Retail Overlay District. Then it depends if the council is comfortable with the current mix of wine tasting versus non-wine tasting establishments in the district. We could certainly retain the current number of no more than five wine tasting facilities on parcels that face the plaza, which will include the corners that face the plaza, and also allow no tasting rooms adjacent to one another within the plaza. We could also implement a use permit for all wine tasting facilities in the plaza and the Prod, and create a special use permit, as I mentioned earlier. And also to have wine tasting facilities report directly to the director on a form that we can create, which outlines their continued existence. This concludes staff's presentation.
Just want to add maybe just a few quick things. I think one thing to think about is, and just remember, if we go back to kind of this list here, well, let me go to this list. Sorry, currently there's the 26 that we have present. Those 26 basically are, as David using, again, zoning language, those are permitted uses. So they are currently grandfathered, and they currently sit with the location, sit with the property. And so one of the things that makes this a little tougher is we're not starting with kind of just a whiteboard and creating something new. Like when you start with cannabis, if the council decides to issue a license or create rules around cannabis license, medicinal dispensary, we won't have any of those. So you're starting kind of with a blank slate. Here we're not starting with a blank slate. We're starting basically with 26 of these that are, according to review by legal, these are grandfathered, these are prior permitted uses. And there's a value to these, right? Because as we've seen, it does look like that there's a higher rent that can become from these tasting rooms. And so with that means that there's a value, and even if council does set a limit, I just think we need to talk about expectations. It may take some time for those numbers potentially to be reduced. So not a reason not to do it, but I just think it needs to be clear that those are permitted uses, and it would take some time for some of these changes to occur. So I think with that, there's a lot of information. You've heard prior information, be happy to answer any questions and then hear discussion.
I have a question, because if I don't get to it, I'll forget it. Could you go back some slides? I don't find where mine says regulations. You were back 2 or 3. I think it was something else. It was numerical.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
Are they numbered on there?
No, this is different. Don't know.
Not the one that's in numerical in it?
It said regulations, and it was lined up. It's not on any of the stuff I have. Well, I don't know. New. This is somewhat new, so go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, all this information comes out of the staff report, but it's just kind of organized in a different way, so sorry
Well,
about that.
I can't find it.
Okay. So we have information about having a use permit or a special use permit, but what can you tell me about having a license instead of a use permit?
There are some land uses that you can put in tandem with a discretionary entitlement, which would be similar to like a card room, a massage parlor, tattoo parlors, where you want to attach the regulatory provision of a use permit along with another methodology to kind of connect the two together. The use permits and the special use permit that we're talking about, they run specifically with the land, and I can receive council input here, but the license permit could be non-stationary, I guess, but it has to be attached to a land use provision. Defer to council.
And so is that something that we could use in this context? Similar to the proposed cannabis ordinances that we've looked at, and maybe not totally similar, but when we were working on our tobacco retail license program, until we decided not to do that.
It all depends on really what you're aiming to achieve. Many of the cannabis ordinances have a licensing component to them because the cities typically put numerical limitations on the number of cannabis operators, and they want to have a beauty contest of some kind, and they want to be able to review those licenses every year because of the qualifications it takes to run those businesses, the background searches that they're entitled to do, particularly with respect to criminal background history. And I don't know if that's the purpose you're seeking to achieve in suggesting a license as an appropriate approach to wine tasting facilities. What are you hoping to achieve? Are you trying to make these sort of their annual entitlements and they can be revoked after 1 year, or the applicant needs to come back to have them renewed? Is there going to be a vetting process each year?
I can answer your question. The purpose would be to be able to limit the number, but give the benefit of the limitation to the business rather than it be something that benefits the property owner. So it's something that they could carry with them, and it's also something that if they left, then the person behind them wouldn't benefit from the use permit that the person before them got.
Oh, I see. So it would be attached to the owner rather than the property, or the operator instead of the property. So if the operator decided not to continue the business, then the entitlement would die.
Or if they decided to move locations, then they could take it with them and not open up a hole behind them that would be held open for another tasting room.
So they could move it to another location. Would that move require any kind of oversight on the part of the city?
Not as far as this component is concerned. It would be, if we want to give out 27 licenses, and these are the people, and they can move around and take it with them, or then they could, when they decide to go out of business, then we have one more, and then we can give that to somebody else. And the biggest part being that they have the license. It's not that the property owner has a use permit so that they can just squeeze people because they can't go anywhere. They only can stay in that one place. So it's the leverage.
I can add to that. So kind of like, like people used to have taxi medallions. So somebody would get a medallion and they would have the right to do it. This would be, like as a thought bubble, a similar idea that you as a wine, you have a winery, you own the medallion, let's say it's the license to have a tasting room. You can take that, you can move it, you can do what you want. But the experience in Healdsburg, I talked to somebody about it today, was when they limited the plaza facing businesses, that the rents, because because of the scarcity, the landlords doubled the rents, and so it went from $5,000 a month to $10,000 a month, and then the only people who could afford the plaza facing tasting rooms were the largest corporations. And so the thought being, how might we not empower landlords to seek out the highest price for rent, but instead empower the business owner to have their license, take it wherever they want to take it, and then when they're done, somebody else can get a new license. That's the idea of who will be empowered in this situation, the landlord or the business owner, and it's a preference for the business owner.
Well, there may need to be a combination, as the planning director was suggesting, particularly when you're made to comment about the owner of the medallion can move it somewhere else. You'd want that somewhere else to be allowable under your zoning code. So there would need to be a combination here of those kind of regulatory forces. What I'd like to have happen, at least from our office's perspective tonight, is to hear what you want. And then we can go back and develop the tools that will achieve that. And then we would return and show you what kind of tools you can use and cannot for the purposes you're seeking. We'll certainly look into that to see if that's a doable technique.
So if you're looking for, if I'm hearing correctly, does that mean you're leaving a space open, but you move somewhere else, but now there's two instead of one?
I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing that the space that's left open would not necessarily be a wine tasting facility entitlement. That would just be a retail, for example. If it's zone retail, that particular site could then have different types of retail. It would not be forever dedicated to a wine tasting facility. Right now, we have 2627 use permitted wine tasting facilities in the city. Those get to be there theoretically forever. Now, they can end up being abandoned if the operator doesn't use them for a particular period of time, and or the use is changed voluntarily. But if those uses are currently allowed by historical practice and by use permits that have been granted, and as I mentioned before, if you put a limitation of 26 or 27 licenses or wine tasting facilities, that's the top number you're going to allow, theoretically you would never have another permit come before you. Because if those people who currently own those properties continue to use those properties as wine tasting facilities, they will then exhaust the numerical limit that you've imposed.
Well, and then what if they go out of business?
If they go out of business and a new wine tasting facility is reinstituted within, I think we have a 6-month, or maybe it's longer than that. It's a year. Our zoning code provides that if you abandon a use for a year or longer and you intend to abandon that use, then you have forfeited the entitlement to continue that use. So if within 1 year of a particular wine tasting business going out of business, if the landowner finds a substitute wine tasting operator to step in, then that use continues and is allowed to continue.
Thank you.
I mean, I guess I would like to see some legal research on that topic, because if it's a license scheme, the use of tasting room is still permitted. They haven't lost their right to have a tasting room there. They still can, there's a variety of uses that can be held there. They currently have a tasting room. If there was a licensing scheme, they still would be allowed to have a tasting room there if the person had a license.
I'm not sure if you're referring to the existing operators or not. That's going to be an interesting question. Meaning they are essentially exempt from any additional regulatory activity in the part of the city, because they vested their rights some time ago to be there with a wine tasting facility under the rules that were in effect when the permission was extended to them. And they have a right to continue without any additional regulatory scheme imposed upon them.
They can continue. I'm saying that's why I would like to see like a memo about it, but they can continue. No one's saying that the current businesses cannot continue. You're saying that even though the business and the landlord are not the same person, that the rights of the business have inured to the landlord. And I'm saying that if the landlord is allowed to, that they are not prohibited from having a tasting room there in the future. It's just that in order to have a tasting room there in the future, the tasting room has to have the license. And so, it's still a permissible use. No one has taken away their permission to have that use. They can. The regulation isn't even on the landlord, it's on the tasting room. So whoever's there now gets the license goes with them wherever they go. And if a new person comes in, they certainly can come in if they have a license. And no one has taken away the right of the landlord to lease it to a tasting room. So I don't understand how that would not be allowed as a scheme.
We'll look into that.
And since our process up until now hasn't required a use permit in and of itself, so I'm wondering if the lack of, existing entitlements, that they did not have to procure anything, so what is attached? And I don't know, I find vested rights very confusing. But I have a lot of questions.
So just to be totally clear about what I was proposing, it's a completely alternate scheme to what the staff has proposed. And what I'm proposing is that instead of the landlord getting the right to have a tasting room, so that that's always going to be a tasting room, that the business owner, the winery owners, they get the license and they hold it and they can go wherever they want with it, and they go to a bigger space or a smaller space, and they don't have to wait for an opening of the landlord. And that way, the landlord can't charge the highest price possible, because whoever has the license will control where they get to bring their winery. So it's basically favoring the wineries over the landlord in a licensing scheme. That's my idea.
So what happens to the vacated space?
If somebody who has a license, wants to move in there, they can. It's allowed, but you can't move in there unless you have a license. And so Or, go ahead.
Well, and one thing that wouldn't happen is if we move to land use permits, if a tasting room vacates, then they wouldn't want to let someone else take that use because then they might lose the use, so they'll leave it empty, waiting for another tasting room. Whereas if it was a license program, assuming this is something that could even happen, it's something where you can't, there's no guarantee that a license will come your way, so there's more of a motivation to just rent it out to someone who wants to have a store on the plaza.
And I said my idea, but I meant the idea.
My concern is, I just personally would like through attrition, us to decrease the number of wine tasting rooms. I don't know what that means. I have no idea. And I'm kind of confused. I came here understanding everything, and now I have lots of new stuff. And I have to tell you, I'm confused again. But I like what you're saying, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a wine tasting room. Could be everything, anything. And it would be in control of the company that controls the wine company. And they could take it wherever they wanted.
Right, and then if we do have local businesses, it helps them, because then they get the benefit of having the license instead of, just the property owner getting to rent it out to the highest bidder, like what happened in Healdsburg.
And because it's still, there would be regulations, I think as our city attorney said, they have to move into a certain area that allows this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. David?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused, but just so public understands, we're only supposed to be asking questions right now and not commenting. So sometimes it's really confusing because we get different people in here that don't know how the process is. So I just wanted to mention that to public. You will have a chance to speak. I don't have any questions. The only thing that I would like to hear a little bit from public speakers when they do speak, I've been trying to figure out how the local component would be able to go into the ordinance. I've talked to a lot of people and nobody's come up with anything that would even make close to sense. So if anybody has any great ideas on that, I'd like to hear it.
Sorry, Councilmember Took, you're talking about local grape sourcing.
Yes, or local ownership or something within Sonoma County. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Does anyone else have a comment? Nothing, I'll take it out. Public. If anybody would like to speak? What happened?
My name's Miles Bergen. I live at 2525 Edgewater in Santa Rosa.
I'm sorry, your name again?
Miles Bergen.
Thank you.
So, Mayor Agramonte, members of the council, like I said, my name's Miles Bergen, and I would like to voice my support for making a moratorium on new tasting rooms in the plaza permanent. I grew up here in Sonoma and lived in the valley continuously until 2008 when I joined the Navy. And when I came back in 2014, I was sort of amazed at how much this town had changed. The working class neighborhoods where I grew up were sort of overrun by vacation rentals, weekend homes for the Bay Area elite, and rent prices have skyrocketed, and obviously dozens of new tasting rooms had opened up on the plaza. I do want to acknowledge that there are many benefits to having tasting rooms here. For example, the wine industry is one of the few viable career paths for young people in our community, and generally does pay a living wage. My wife and I both work in tasting rooms, and combined make just about 200% of AMI. And with the help of the VA home loan system, we were actually able to buy our first house 18 months ago. We need tasting rooms, but we also need to make sure that they're not displacing other local businesses or driving up commercial rents to the point where our residents can't afford to open their own businesses. One of the unique parts about working in a tasting room is the opportunity to talk to people from all over the world every day. And every day I talk to people, and the topic always comes up of why they chose Sonoma over places like Napa or Healdsburg. And the things I hear over and over again is what people appreciate about Sonoma is authenticity. When you come to Sonoma, you don't just get a row of wine tasting rooms, high-end boutiques, and upscale restaurants. You get small businesses as well. And it sort of made me realize that businesses like the Chocolate Cow and Araldi's play just as big a part in driving tourism traffic to our community as the Girl and the Fig or Sebastiani. And if people wanted Disneyland, wine Disneyland, they wouldn't come here. They'd go to Napa or Healdsburg. So I think what we need is balance. We need to reap the real benefits that come with wine tasting industry and with tourism in terms of high-paying service sector jobs, TOT sales and property tax revenues. But there has to be a point where we sort of say enough is enough. And I think we passed that point a long time ago. I would be in support of both Vice Mayor Harrington and Councilmember Hundley's plan about businesses controlling those licenses. I would also be in support of a significant reduction, up to a 25% reduction in the number of tasting rooms we have here, so that we can make sure that our community reflects our local values. The wine industry obviously is a part of who we are, an important part of who we are, but it's not all of who we are as a community. And I think our plaza retail spaces and our downtown businesses need to reflect the entirety of our community. So thank you for taking the time to listen.
Thank you, Mr. Bergen.
Good evening, I'm Tony Mall, 835 Knight Street. Not going to bore you guys with my family's history here in Sonoma, nor my career that got me excited to move back to Sonoma to start my own wine company. Back in 2009 we did start, and we've grown our small company up to just about 1,000 cases now and looking to grow further. One of the biggest problems with not being able to have a tasting room is drive traffic, leaving me to doing stuff online or through restaurants and other venues. I don't have the money to build a big winery to drive traffic that way. Having a tasting room is a great way to take that next step. And the biggest thing I would say is we just need direction on how to get this done. And by continuing to delay this further and further and just asking questions, the ABC's in place. I carry licenses to sell wine. And by creating some type of medallion or some type of permit, who's to say that a winery that wants to move to Sonoma to start creating Sonoma wine, how are you going to vet them? Are you going to just believe them that they're going to create Sonoma wine by now that they can have a tasting room on the plaza? And then who's going to uphold that? Because there's plenty of business fronts throughout the entire valley that have got some type of use permit that aren't holding to those values that it holds, be it seats or parking spaces or whatever. And I think if you bring up that map again that has the O2 permits on it, what you would see on there is it's pretty sporadic. There's only one area really that shows a bunch next to each other, and it's actually called the Wine Alley. I think when you're looking at tourism and what's the reason why people come here, it's to try the wine. And giving a place like for myself and my family to continue to grow and support my kids in staying in this valley. This is something I need, and I can't go down Broadway. We all know, everybody that's lived here forever, that the tourists don't go down Broadway. And we just had a great presentation, another gateway project that's being delayed even further. So, all I'm asking is you guys help make decisions. Let's create a pathway to help people like myself. Thank you.
Good evening, Maureen Cottingham with Sonoma Valley Vintners and Growers Alliance, and I live at 366 East Main Street. First of all, thank you guys so much for moving this forward. Kathy and David, really been a pleasure working with you up until today to consider, to talk about the considerations and talk about how we can move forward. So appreciate all of your time on behalf of the industry, and also appreciate all of your time tonight for really bringing some considerable options to the table and really trying to move the progress forward. I'm here. There's some wineries in the house that will give you specific examples, have specific questions, maybe some suggestions. But as a person who's representing the industry, I just want to add some pointers that remind you of who we are. As you know, the first grapes were planted in 1812. The wine industry has been a partner in the economic and social progress of the city of Sonoma and obviously Sonoma County for many, many years. We represent in Sonoma Valley 65% of the jobs are related to the wine industry. The city and county benefit from the wine industry's success, as Tony mentioned, through tax revenues, and we help solve specific questions or specific impact problems. And we have additionally a $13.4 billion local economic revenue to that we provide to the county, which is huge. We also are on a daily basis giving back to local nonprofits here in the city limits, and particularly in the valley. So our community is continuing to give and invest in our local community. We have next generation vintners and growers that are starting their businesses and continuing the multi-generational progress that we've seen over many, many, many years. So we are here as an industry to work with you on coming up with solutions, and we appreciate you understanding how our business model works to create the most success for continuing our local thriving economy.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else would like to come step to the podium and speak?
Jeff Zappelli, Walt Wines, Sonoma Valley Vintners and Growers, Government Committee. So I'd just like to echo what Maureen said. I wanted to thank Kathy and your staff for the last year and spending time with us. And David, thank you for meeting with us as well. We actually think that with the recommendations that are pushing forward are good and fair and logical, and that's all we can really ask for in this process, is we're kind of the target of this. So we do have some concerns, though, and I think we can appreciate what the direction that Councilmember Hundley and Harrington are going in terms of direction of license and permit, because at the end of the day, land use is not something that we can control. There are only 5 landlords that own the majority of the businesses in the Sonoma Square, and so we are beholden to those businesses. And so by issuing land use, you're going to, in a sense, give them an advantage over us, where they can actually drive a lot of power and raise our rents. And I would definitely echo what you were saying about in Healdsburg, where not only did rents double or triple, but now they have key fees, where you have to pay upwards of $250,000 just to get a lease on the Plaza Square. So this has real consequences. Land use is a very serious thing that goes with perpetuity for the life of the property. So we're not here to tell you how to do your job, but we're saying that that's something that's very concerning for us. We're also concerned because there are small businesses like those on the Vine Alley, whereby we would not be able to move and grow and stay in the city. And so the natural progression for a small business would be to leave the city. And we don't think that's a very fair thing for anybody, the city or the businesses. Especially because there's no comparable set. If Summer Vine decided to start a mailing list and has an online store, and they have a very good business, and I love those girls, but they would be allowed to move anywhere they'd like to move. And so you'd be penalizing us. And we've been a partner of yours, as Maureen said, for over a century. And the last thing I just wanted to point out was that we're here to work with the city to solve the problems of tourism and to help the city solve the problems of congestion and things like that. We're not here to fight you, but we do need to grow. We're one of the best paying businesses in town. We're one of the longest standing businesses in town. It's not our fault that we drive traffic, but we're here to try to help you to help mitigate those problems. And so we hope that we can continue to be a part of this process, and we hope that each one of you will help engage with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that'd like to step to the podium? Seeing no one, I'll close the public session. Back to us. Are there any discussion?
So I think this whole discussion would be easier for me if it was part of a bigger vision of an economic strategy for the Plaza area. Because I don't think it's ever about one little piece. I think over the years or the decades, we've seen some pieces, ebb, and then other ones move in. So it's like all part of one big picture, and I think that everyone wants a happy, thriving plaza. And I think that there's, data and science that can be used and experts to think about what that looks like and then come up with a strategy of how to have a healthy plaza. So it's hard for me to look at these, and sometimes it feels arbitrary of picking a number or how to do it. But I am really interested in learning more about the feasibility of a license program. And because I think that one of the biggest struggles we have on the plaza right now is the fact that there's so few landowners, and it's, I think that if it just leads to a lot of the problems that we have. And so I don't want to do anything that's going to make that problem worse. And the more I think about what a use permit program would do and how we would have empty stores just waiting for another tasting room to come in just so they don't lose their use, I just don't know if that would ultimately help our situation. And so that's, for now, that's not really a road that I want to go down, because I do think that there are a lot of consequences all around. And if what we're doing is, by making use permits in short supply, we're actually exacerbating our rent situation, then we're not really helping anything. So the license idea intrigues me, and I like the idea of giving something of value to be held by the business themselves. And so that potentially could increase the leverage you might have with your landlords. So there's a lot of things to explore. And I also, just about existing uses, I mentioned where we don't have use permits here, but exactly, when the right attaches, when it's when it's a landlord-tenant situation, that whole part of it I would like to know more about. And then beyond that, if it is something that looks like we could explore, then I think I'd like to come back and talk about it again.
David?
Well, I remember the council, we've actually looked at this before. I think it was 5 or 6 years ago. We just had a little bit of discussion, and since we're just doing recommendations right now of what I would like to see. One thing the Chamber of Commerce did when I was the president in 2012, I believe, I can't remember when it was, we did an inventory of the whole historical overlay, and what I would like to see is an inventory, and checked off next to that what businesses there, how long have they been there, and that can kind of give us a little scope of what, are we tapped out in the wine tasting rooms right now? Because it was mentioned earlier, what are we trying to do as a council, for Sonoma? And I think that for me to answer that question is, I know that there's a lot of people that are concerned about having too many tasting rooms on the square. But on the flip side, I know a lot of people who they won't be vocal about it, but they understand the revenue that's coming in, the nonprofits that exist in this area because of this. So government intervention can always be a double-edged sword. I've always said that I'm for local control and I'm for keeping government at bay, which is kind of surprising as elected official, but I've always felt myself as more of a community servant than a politician. With that said, I do like where we're heading with this. I guess one of my questions is if we could actually kind of go through the process really quick of, we have a deadline, so we know that we have to come up with something at a certain time, but what the process is, leading to that, and who would be involved, and I kind of know who's been involved so far, but what that process would look like.
Well, let's assume we get kind of policy direction from council tonight. We go back and do some research, and then we would need to be back to you no later than your first meeting in January with some kind of clarity and legal options, and obviously can be kind of doing some one-on-one briefings with you prior to that, so you can be mulling. So I think there's some information that, obviously looking at the licensing scheme, but then there needs to be a ordinance drafted or depending if it's an ordinance land use or if it's a resolution or a program drafted. And then if it is a land use issue and requires an ordinance or that type of thing, then if it's land use, we need to go to planning commission and then come back to council. So I think it kind of depends on which tool, and again, maybe it's a hybrid. But, and again, backing up from that May 1 date, it takes, from the time council does a second reading, it's 30 days. And then there's between the first and second, it's a 10-day gap between the first and second reading, 5 days. So your timing, you kind of back up about any final decision from council would need to be April 1, kind of mid-March. So by early March, we would need to be having things be solid. So if there is a chance in front of planning commission, that needs to be happening in January, early February. We got to be back to council by mid-February so that, we don't slip and miss the moratorium deadline should there need to be any kind of ordinance approved. Does that answer your question, Councilmember Cook?
Yeah, it does answer my question, and I do like hearing about the medallion, but one thing that concerns me is, and that's why I'd like to see the inventory, because businesses do need to grow. I wouldn't want to see one business be able to move into somebody else's space due to, because they have a medallion or there's something. So one thing that the council looked back 4 years ago was trying to combine, because one of the things that we were trying to do back then was the fear of wine tastings taking over and getting retail out, which retail, as we all know, is almost dead. But one thing that we were thinking about back then, and what I would like to put direction towards to city staff on my point of view, is trying to figure out a way that we can keep retail with wine tasting rooms. We discussed that, where the shared space, that could be something that, if there is going to be a limit, possibly there could be some little gray areas that can help, because there'll be another recession. I don't know right now, where the city of Sonoma is heading, financially. We've had some really good times, but I think that keeping an ordinance that's a little open-ended would be better for me and the city of Sonoma to know that there could be, in bad times, there could be a little bit of a way to change things.
So just a clarification question, Councilmember Cook. Is that something, having some type of an opportunity for potentially shared space in a retail and a tasting room, is that something that you see as an opportunity to open during bad times, or is that something that would be open like currently?
It would be something available to open, and I guess the best way to explain it without mentioning too many names, but like Span Mountain had their wine tasting room and they had an art gallery, and it was combined mixed use. I think that Highway 12 has the same thing where they're combined, and possibly looking into that, and that could take a lot of the fear, because I think one of the first questions that was mentioned tonight is what are we trying to fix, or where are we trying to move forward? And I think that that's one thing that we need to really look at is, how we can enhance what we have without, totally losing, the wine industry. And I can really tell you that in my mind, when you have government control and you start putting limits and you start breaking things down, you're going to make somebody rich. The government's going to make somebody rich. There's going to be something that happens that nobody has, it just doesn't work. There's always something that comes around. So that's where I think combining the retail with the tasting rooms, moving forward above possibly a certain limit. And I would be for the, definitely to have a permit in place. And I will say I don't like the fact that the wine tasting rooms would have to write a letter to the staff every year. Believe me, I've been in business for 25 years. If I had to write a letter to everybody who I have something, I would forget. The next thing is I would get a nasty little letter in the mail, and it wastes staff's time is what it really does.
Just to respond to what you just said, I hadn't imagined that they would write a letter every year. I think you would just get it's not to require an annual review. maybe you just, confirm that your address is the same
What
once
do
a
you
year,
say?
something like that.
I'm still here.
Still here, yeah, present. No, but I was discussing this matter with Council Member Hundley today, and we went over some of the issues that were affecting the industry. And so we have heard from the public about their desire to have a limitation, but also we shared our concerns about making sure that the thriving businesses we have here can continue to do well and expand, and to kind of address your concerns that you have brought forward. So I was really enthused that the idea of a license perhaps appeals to you as well. I mean, maybe no regulation appeals to you more, but if there has to be a regulation, that the idea of a license might put it so that the footing isn't completely unequal between the business owner and the landlord. So I really want to look forward at that option if it's possible, but I think it would only be possible if the question that I raised earlier with the city attorney was addressed about whether or not the landowners where the businesses currently are had some rights that had inured to them somehow. In terms of the total number, I don't know that has to be, I think there should be a limit. I don't know if it's going to come back to us tonight, if that number needs to be decided at this moment. One of the difficulties with this is that we don't have any particular data to back up the specific number. It's like, this feels like too many, but maybe that's not enough. So it's really like, it's very soft, and we don't have particular data about the economic impacts one way or the other. So it's difficult to make a decision, and I'm sure that feels very arbitrary to the wine industry. Like, why 26 and not 30 or 15? I'm sure it feels very arbitrary. So I think we will, as Councilmember Hundley said, address that with our economic study, and I think that data will be really helpful. One thing about a licensing scheme as opposed to a use permit also is that if it's just a resolution, the resolution can be changed or amended at a different, at a later time. So if there were an economic downturn and the then city council decided that it would be better to give additional licenses, it would be much easier for them to do that at that time. So that's all I got.
I have some questions.
So I sat out in the audience in 2012, and of course, there was no restriction on the number of wine tasting rooms, which was unfortunate, because there was a real belief. In fact, I think the newspapers supported it, the market would control it. No, that's not happening here because there's so few landlords. And if there is some way that gives weight to what you're saying, Amy, to be able to give the wine tasting rooms more of a bargaining power with landlords, I would be very happy about that, because something has to work. I feel so bad because I wanted to come to a much better decision, but I don't know. But what I do know is that I believe, as you do, that we need to have a decreased number of wine tasting rooms. Where that is, I don't know. Tony Mall had some great ideas. I heard him share out in the lobby. So I don't know. I'm for trying something else. And I don't know. Did you say this is what Healdsburg is?
I don't think anybody has a licensing scheme, and so it would be novel. But I've heard the feedback from other places that the use permit has the unintended consequence of making it only the largest corporations that can have the tasting rooms, because they just go for the highest rent. Or it has had that.
I don't know. I'm disappointed. I think, we're moving forward, but one thing I know about business is they're out there to make money, to have a good product, and I just think we still are not where we need to be. I think I liked your idea. I just, I don't know. I wish I had something better to say, but I really don't. And I don't know. It just got too big. It's too big now, with all the details and everything. I feel that it's too big. And so I'm going to look to the council. I guess two things I said. I would like to see a decrease, possibly because of attrition. And I would like I mean, I don't know, I'd love to confer with, not me, but, you know, the city manager with the wine industry, people we have, to see if, to float whatever Amy's idea might be.
Just
It would
for,
be-
just for the record, I know I said it was my idea, but it's Councilmember
sorry.
Hundley and myself.
Well, the two attorneys together came up with this bombing thing. So I'm really looking forward to that, because I still think we need to make some kind of decision. I apologize. I don't, you know.
So I think Jeff and I have a few questions too. I mean, hearing kind of some general thoughts from each of you is very helpful. And clearly the licensing idea is a way to kind of to flip the interests, which is something that we've had a lot of conversation as staff of what could that look like. It is something that we've not seen anywhere else for this type of industry. So it'd have to be creative, and obviously there's definitely some legal research in terms that would need to be dug carefully.
And is that would it be a marketing tool?
Oh, well,
You know, I mean, how does that expand into actually marketing? I don't know, I'm just
yeah,
asking.
I'm not sure I can answer that question right now either. I think there's some basic kind of legal research that we would need to do first and really look at how to try to use this creative tool, because I think it does deal with some of the interests that, you know, we've all been struggling with some. I do have just a few questions though, because what council hasn't talked about is, so let's just pretend for a minute. Let's pretend that you can do some kind of a licensing scheme and you can no longer have it tied to the property. Now, if you did that, and let's just pretend you kept it at the current 26, okay? So those 26 folks now have the ability to take that license and they can move to another location if they're in 250 square feet and they now want to move to something in the 750. And they're not tied to that location. That location, when it becomes vacant, is no longer, they could accept a license, but they don't hold the value, they don't hold the right to that use anymore. I think is
As
the way
it
to
is
say it.
today.
Correct, as it is today.
Yeah. So instead of the landlord saying, I'm the only place you can have a tasting room, the
Correct.
tasting room is saying, I can go wherever I want.
Right, it creates mobility. So, but here's a question. So again, if council wants to have a number limit, or you want to be cautious about concentration, that's where we enter the world of land use. So if you do want to say, you know, again, there's currently 5 on the plaza face. So even if you have a license, I don't want any more than 5 on the plaza face. Or I don't want, on the plaza face, you can't be next to each other. So again, while there's this licensing idea, council still may want it, and the problem with some of that is we'd have to figure out how to weave some of that into the licensing, or how do you do that in a way that, you know, again, doesn't become a use permit. So there's some, but if council if you have ideas or there's other interests you have about location, that would also be good to hear, because we need to think about that as we think about the scheme.
David?
Well, I could answer how I would feel towards that. I think it's a terrible idea. I think when you start doing something where you could take away clustering, like somebody was talking about Vine Alley, I think Vine Alley works. I think it's great for Sonoma. Maybe I vacation in Murphy's that has 29 tasting rooms and a population of 2,000 people. And I've seen what happens to communities that don't have a robust anything. So I do understand the diversity, but I think that when you start limiting different properties, and that's why I want to make sure I was heard, because I didn't hear it is when I was talking about the Chamber of Commerce, I really think we need to take an inventory, because it's there. It's very simple to do. I mean, we had a map that shows the different addresses to see where it is, you know, where the tasting rooms could go or possibly would go. But I do believe when you start telling a landlord or even an individual, you can't have a tasting room there because there's 2 banks here and there's Highway 12 and we don't want that. I think that's where you get that government control that I get very, very concerned about. So I would not be supporting anything that had anything to do with proximity of where the tasting room was.
I do like the limitation on plaza-facing locations, and think that the current status quo is fine with me. And then, while I do think that there's some locations that lend themselves well to clustering, on, I don't know for sure, but something like, certain areas, alleys, where it's fine to have whatever number side by side, but if it's on like a major street, not neighbors. I mean, something like that. I'm not totally set, but something that would space things out a little bit. And then for as far as the geographic area, I think I'd like to do the downtown planning district.
Is there something now that restricts, let's say bars that serve, liquor, or liquor stores, isn't there a proximity issue, regulation? Yeah, for concentration.
Broadly, ABC, yes.
I mean, I'm just,
I
I
think
come
there
from a
is.
place where there are lots of bars, so.
Yeah, so there, and again, I don't remember all the detail on this, but ABC definitely has areas, they will define some areas as an over-concentration. It doesn't mean that you can't still have them, but there are some definitions, and I apologize, I don't remember all the
No.
specifics, because it's been 10 years since I've dealt with some of those. But yes, there are some of those state issues, around bars.
I have a couple of questions too, and Kathy has alluded to one of them, and that is, council members Hundley and Vice Mayor Harrington, are you looking to have similar conditions that might be imposed through a use permit process imposed as part of the licensing scheme? So the license would come with certain conditions that maybe would look very much like those that you would impose through a use permit process. Is that where you see the conditions being manifested, is in the license itself? It's not just a medallion you get with no strings attached to it.
Well, I am not at that stage of thinking. I don't know if Councilmember Hundley is. I mean, there are, perhaps, the example of the marijuana licensing would be helpful. In order to figure out like what it would actually look at, I'd have to look at some other types of licensing schemes for me to get a sense of what the possibilities are. I don't, I was give it broadly, like, can
Okay.
it be done?
All right.
Yes or no, not
All right.
I assume that we could figure out the mechanics of how to make it happen.
If the goal here, at least one of them, is to change a bit of the economic leverage, would you achieve the same result by making wine tasting rooms principally permitted in all commercial and mixed-use zones? That any property owner with a willing tenant could pop up a wine tasting facility anywhere in those zones. Now, the issue that you have there is that it's hard to impose any kind of conditions when you have a principally permitted use, but you could probably come up with some that would have to be adhered to by those who wish to take advantage of it, like you have now. Right now in the commercial zone, wine tasting facilities are permitted as of right. You don't need to get any kind of oversight from the city other than a building permit.
And in the mixed-use zone, you do need a use permit.
Yeah, so I'm suggesting it's only a sort of a
Well-
talking point here. Can you achieve this result
there's-
by doing
there's-
something a little bit more simple?
But that wouldn't achieve the other side. So the parallel paths are having some reasonable regulations of tasting rooms, but not making certain things worse, and then maybe making things a little bit better at the same time. If there's anything else out there that does that.
Also, if the answer is that if we increase the availability of locations for tasting rooms, that there would be greater bargaining power and less density downtown, I think Tony Mall spoke to that, which is people want to be on the plaza and around the plaza because other places aren't going to have the foot traffic necessary to sustain those businesses. So increasing the supply by making it easier to open them in other areas, I don't know if it would have the intended consequence of spreading it out.
Yeah, because, earlier when we were talking about putting retail with wine tasting rooms. You know, some of the places that I go, and the reason I bring that up is I think it's something that definitely we need to look at. If you do have a limit of 26 or 28, depending on where your limit is on how many tasting rooms, then the new use permits, and that's where it's a little confusing because we don't know, Vice Mayor Harrington, her question to the attorney at this point about how far back we can go into the grandfather. But one thing that, you know, when you look at a business that is failing in the retail district that would want to maybe have a wine tasting venue come in there, I mean, you can go to Safeway and wine taste. And we're sitting here, you know, talking about, you know, our plaza and different things. But if you look at the business model, it's something that I would definitely, you know, want to take a look at. And that could be one of the conditions of the above whatever number we have. And that would allow somebody that has a small wine label to be able to move into that spot. And that was where I keep struggling on the local control aspect. But I know the wine industry, and I know grape sourcing, and none of that would work. But if there's a way that we could do something that keeps the farm to table, because I think that's one thing that we're trying to do here is, you know, keep the farm to table, keep people from having to go out and get a distributor that takes, you know, 50% of all their profit, and they can sell their local product. So that's what we're trying to do.
Just a question for Councilmember Cook. So are you saying that you think we should try to incentivize having retail and wine tasting together? Or just that we should permit it? Are we trying to incentivize it or just allow it?
I think allow it. I think that there's a concern out there that wine tasting rooms are taking away retail space, which I believe is probably true, especially when you start talking about these rents. But trying to combine it, and it's something the council tried to do 4 or 5 years ago, and I think it would have been very successful because a lot of the tasting rooms at that point, because there was a little bit of a recession, were starting to combine that anyway. So I'm saying if you pick a magic number of 26 tasting rooms, and somebody comes in, and let's say that Mr. Mole did want to come in and have a tasting room, where if he partnered up with a local business, it would be allowable under
Over the 26.
Over the 26, and it would be a part of the permit process.
I think I would support having an ultimate numeric limit. I don't know what that is today, but and not allowing it after that. But in terms of the plaza facing businesses, I think the current number that we have, plaza facing tasting rooms, the current number that we have is good. I would support keeping that number. It could be that the ultimate thing adopted, if we can do licensing, is that the spots on the plaza are grandfathered in, and then in addition to that, there's a number of licenses that are available for other locations, and that the total number takes into consideration the 5 that are grandfathered in on the plaza, which are the benefit really inures to the landowner, and then the bulk of them, which are licenses for everywhere else, that would go with the business owner. So I would support both, yeah. And then for the scope of the regulations, same as Councilmember Hundley.
So, as a city man, have you heard enough from us?
No, I think we've got some work to do based on some of the ideas that are floated, but I think I've got clarity about what you each are talking about. I do want to go back to Councilmember Cook's, though, the inventory. So I want to understand a little more. My understanding in the past is that the city and the chamber used to keep some kind of a vacancy inventory. What we did for this project is a year ago, the chamber and planning worked together to kind of try to create just the wine tasting room inventory, and we included some of the rest of those licenses so we could really understand some of these that it's a 41 or a 42 because it's not an O2 license. But are you talking about creating an inventory of all businesses within the plaza retail overlay? Or I just want to understand what your interest is and what you are talking about?
Well, there was a comment. There was a comment about shooting in the dark, which I do believe that's probably one thing we want to be very careful about. Is 22 the magic number? Is 45 the magic number? As people are cringing at home, but how many tasting rooms can the plaza have that's viable? I mean, if it is 22, looking at that inventory, and that inventory will tell you what businesses are there, and you can see the vacancy rate. Because there's some areas that, if you look at some of the long-term leases that are there, or that just might not be set up for a for a tasting room, it would just be knowledge for the council when we come back. So the direction to staff is just let's have an inventory of what is in that area and what looks like it could be a tasting room.
So I can appreciate the interest of having that. I think I'm a little concerned just about, because if we're looking at the plaza retail, that's a more confined space. But if we're talking, so I want to try to get some clarity. If you're talking about the downtown district, the two of your colleagues, that's a much bigger area. So one question would be the geographic area, and if the full council is interested in this information as well. So the geography limit is one thing, and two, are you looking at just kind of the retail space, that stuff that's just on the that could be used for a tasting room? Obviously, some kind of a retail, and I don't know. We've been able to get from business license information, like how long the business has been there. Obviously, we're not going to be able to get information on some of the lease arrangements and that information.
Yeah, I don't want to get too fancy here. I was just
Yeah.
mentioning that it would be nice when staff comes back is maybe a little collaboration with the Chamber of Commerce. I know Lori Decker used to do the vacancy rates, so you kind of know. And I'm only talking about the Plaza Historical District. And not to get too fancy, because anything upstairs, of course, is not adequate for a tasting room, I would assume. So it's everything downstairs, and that number, I remember when I was in the chamber, I mean, it's just, there's not a lot.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts from council? Okay.
Not for me.
All right.
Oh, just good work, staff. Good work, planning commission. A lot of time and energy into this. So thank you.
I appreciate
And I
everyone.
appreciate the information from the vendors and growers. I think it was really important to hear. So I appreciate the time. I'm sorry, I think there's a lot of discussion going on. If I was a business person, I wouldn't be happy. It doesn't make sense, but I hope we're getting somewhere. And I think that it just started out wrong in 2012. People were screaming for different things and it never happened. So here we are today.
Well, and I think part of what I hear council saying is you want to do it right. So again, you want to be careful, but I think the other thing you could think about is you could be potentially making a kind of a 2 or 3 year plan, and then get that economic development strategic plan, and then potentially continue to massage and adapt, which might be easier if it's a resolution versus an ordinance. So we'll do some research and come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're now moving on. If the people that are leaving have any further comments of what they heard this evening, I would encourage you to send that to the people you've been working with, the city managers and others. Thank you. I would appreciate that. See, are there any reports from council members? None? Okay, now I understand, we have dedications. I dedicated this evening to former President George H.W. Bush, and I don't know how we get that anywhere, but I thought I'd just mention that. And I'm sorry, you also, Amy?
Oh, for Ken Brown's daughter, it's her birthday.
And Mayor Gamonti, maybe if I could just mention 2 events that are happening this week. It's the last Sonoma Art Walk on Thursday night, so you can just Google Sonoma Art Walk and go to their website, and it should be a fun night. And then also there is on Friday night, I think it starts at 5, but double check. This is Hot Chocolate with Santa, and arrives, this I think is sponsored with the Seroptimist, and arrives in the fire engine, and it's a sweet event right on the plaza, so Friday night.
Thank you. Adjourn. This meeting's adjourned.